Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today we continue with the compilation videos which are aimed at people who are working or people who are driving or people who just have a heck of a lot of time and want something on in the background. Today we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Our first story today comes to us from DC Wicker 05. You said 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Let's jump right in. Strap in, it's a ride worth the read in my opinion. I worked for a trucking company. They made sucrose for different food plants in the area, Turkey Hill, Pepsi, etc. My job was to wash the inside of the liquid sucrose trailers so they could be reloaded. This was done by hooking them up to an automated wash system. I drove the lot, picked up an empty trailer, took it to the 2-trailer wash bay building, hooked it up and ran the cycle. Then parked the wash trailer in the loading staged area. I was hired as a temp to replace the previous first shift guy who injured his knee. When I was hired, him and a guy who kinda knew the job taught me how to do it, but there was only one official first shift person who knew the job. The other guy just could kinda fumble his way through it. Then there was a second shift guy who knew the job as well. The job required you to be extremely active. You worked in a room that would sometimes seem like it rained from all the steam condensing on the ceiling because you were washing 2 at a time with 190-degree plus water for a 20-minute session. I ended up being hired full-time from the temp agency. The company actually bought out my contract because I was doing so well, and the first shift guy ended up retiring due to his injury. About a year later, the second shift guy quits out of nowhere, so they hire a new guy, and now I have to train him. This guy is less than good at the job. I keep telling management that, but you know, they're management. Eventually, he ends up dropping a trailer off the lift truck before putting the lift down, bending the landing gear and doing $11,000 in damage. Anytime there's an accident, they require a drug test. He tested positive for coke and was fired. I ended up having to do first and second shift by myself since I was the only person who knew the job. It wasn't that bad because second shift didn't have as many trailers, so a 10-hour day and I'd usually be done. Eventually, they hired a new guy, very big fellow, and this didn't seem like a fit for him. About 3 months in, the loaders come over cause there's no clean trailer staged. They found him passed out on top of a trailer. They honestly thought that he'd had a heart attack or something, but it turned out he was just drunk, so he got fired. Guess who's back to working both shifts? At first, it wasn't too bad. I could get 4 trailers done in an hour, so 32 in an 8-hour shift if I'm busting butt. There was literally no way to do it any faster since there's a 20-minute wash cycle and you still have to pull 2 trailers in and hook them up. Normally, there were about 25 trailers for first shift and 8 to 10 for second shift. But then, a company that took 5 dry trailers a shift for first and 3 to 5 a shift for second tripled their order for wet trailers due to their on-site processing plant going down. I went from 10-hour days to working from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. for like a month straight in the summer in a building that got about 10 plus degrees hotter than the ambient air was. I kept telling my supervisor, my plant manager, and the company manager that I couldn't keep this up. I kept being told I had to do my job. Do as you're told. One time I worked from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. Thursday and back in at 5:30 a.m. Friday. That was the day I caused $5,000 in damages. I backed a trailer out without unhooking it first, ruining the hoses, and pulling a pump off the mounts. So now I had to get drug tested, and since the last 2 guys failed, on the drive there, my manager asked me if I was going to fail. I said it depends on what they test for. He said they test for everything. I asked if that included caffeine and exhaustion. He just kind of blankly looked at me, then turned back to the road. Drug test passed, taken back to work. Now I have 1 wash bay to use due to the damage I caused, and I have to back into it because it's the first bay that's broken in a pull-through setup, and maintenance is there repairing it. I ended up being there till almost 1 a.m. again. Monday, I come in having almost fell asleep on the drive. I pulled my manager aside, the plant manager aside, and the owner's son aside. They all said, just gotta do the job I was hired to do what I'm told. They said they're working to find a new person, so I just need to keep doing my trailers. So Tuesday, that's what I did. When I was hired, I was told my schedule was 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., and the trailers in that time slot were mine, along with the first 2 second shift trailers if they were there by 2:30 p.m. So I got there at 7, did only the first shift trailers and 2 second shift trailers as I was told when I got hired, and clocked out at 3 p.m. I shut my phone off and took my girlfriend to the fair. The next morning, I went in at 7 once again and got to work. The supervisor and plant manager get in at 9, and 9:05, they're in my office. I get escorted to the office of the owner's son, where he proceeded to chew me out for a solid 45 minutes. I just sat there and let him rant. Turns out, once I left, my supervisor and plant manager had to do my job. And you know, since they were supervisors and plant managers, obviously they were trained in the position and knew exactly what to do. Sarcasm. They managed to do 4 trailers from 5 p.m. when they realized I left until midnight. This is the same amount I could do in 1 hour. So once his rant was over, I said, "Well, clearly you're not going to fire me." He was taken aback. I continued, "You have no one who can do my job. You didn't take me seriously when I said I couldn't do it alone anymore. And so I decided I'd show you how important I was. I've got a kid and a life outside this job. The pay is great, but I'm not going to kill myself to get it and put in 90 to 110 hour weeks in the dead of summer. You said 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. when I got hired. That was what I was told. So that's what I did. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me a raise and 3 weeks paid vacation. You're going to let me pick the guy who takes second shift. If you can't find someone willing to take second, I will then train them on first and transfer to second when they're fully trained. But I'll get the shift differential on top of my raise if I do that." He looked at me like I just robbed him, but then after a solid 5 silent minutes, he agreed. See, each trailer that didn't get washed the night before was assessed a late fee by the company who it went to, anywhere from $500 to $5,000, and just last night, I had cost them $21,000 in fees. I think he realized that would quickly be a problem if they had no one to wash any trailers. We ended up pulling over the guy who kinda knew how to do the job from first shift that helped train me when I started there. He took first shift and I went to second. I ended up being the highest paid employee in the wet department and any department that wasn't management or QC actually, in only 2 years of being there, when there were guys who had been loaders for 15 plus years. I stayed another year or so, but eventually it was more nonsense and I had my fill. I think a lot of workers in a lot of positions don't actually know their worth to the company. If you don't know your worth to the company, you need to sit back and think about it. How many other people can do the job that you do with minimal training? Because if the answer is that anybody else could do your job, then it might be time to look for some up training or even some outside training to further your position and get you into a better spot. Do me a quick favor, have a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're not actually subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Our second story today comes to us from Redman082001. Don't want to give me my bacon? That's fine. Let's jump right in. This happened to me about a year ago during the peak of COVID, and I thought I would share it. There were several restaurants that were struggling last year, somewhere near the peak of COVID. Several shut down completely, and others fired all of their staff just to try to stay afloat. Around this time, my wife and I made it a habit to order takeout from our favorite establishments. We always tip the standard 20% plus, despite these always being takeout orders. One restaurant in particular forgot to include the bacon that was supposed to come with our order. The order was around $20 with a tip of around $5, so around $25 total. When you picked your order up from this restaurant, you had to park and come inside. There was no drive-thru or curbside pickup. On this particular day, I picked up our order as usual and drove home about a 5-minute drive. We immediately discovered that the bacon we had ordered was missing, so I called the restaurant. I expected to call and simply have them refund the $3 cost of the bacon. Simple enough, right? Wrong. This restaurant only had one person working the front, so when you called, you knew exactly who you were speaking with. When I called and stated that they must have forgotten to include the bacon, before I had a chance to ask for any type of resolution, refund, replacement, etc., This person informed me that there was a large sign in the restaurant instructing customers to check their orders for accuracy before leaving the store. As it turns out, the sign they mentioned was there. The instructions for checking your order was one of the about 5 notes hastily written on a piece of printer paper taped to a wall. It was out of the way, not obvious, and sloppily handwritten. However, I had failed to read this note and I had failed to check my order for accuracy before leaving the store. I admitted this and asked them to either refund the $3 or I could come pick up the missing bacon. Definitely not a preferred option, but whatever. The restaurant refused these requests, told me the missing bacon was my fault, and went as far as to question whether the bacon had actually been forgotten, stating that they remembered packing my order. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. They had basically accused me of lying about $3 worth of bacon that was missing from an order. This conversation had escalated quickly, in the span of about 30 seconds, and I was pissed. I informed this person that they had failed to provide what I had ordered, and that I would be forced to seek compensation, all $3 worth. I asked how they preferred I go about seeking this compensation, hoping that they would succumb and just give me a $3 refund. However, to no one's surprise but my own, the restaurant told me to go ahead and file a chargeback because they had video proof and that I would lose that chargeback case. So I did exactly that. I called up my credit card company and filed a chargeback. This chargeback was for $3 on a $25 charge. Only $3, not the full charge. The agent with my credit card company offered to simply refund the $3 several times, but I insisted that it was the principle of it at this point, so I proceeded with the chargeback. There is paperwork that you have to fill out if a merchant contests a chargeback. About 3 months after initiating the chargeback, I get paperwork in the mail that instructs me to provide all of the proof I have. I provided no proof other than a recollection of what the merchant had stated, including them stating that they had video evidence of the bacon going into my order. I felt like I had already won at this point. It was costing them time and energy, and I was happy to fight the fight, all for the sake of $3. A couple of months after I submitted this follow-up paperwork, I get a letter from the credit card company stating that they had decided in my favor, and that the merchant was forced to credit me the $3. A big win for humanity. What many people don't know is that a chargeback costs the merchant, especially small merchants, and this cost can easily be upwards of $100, despite the chargeback being for only $3. Additionally, if a merchant has enough chargebacks, a card processor may increase the merchant's rates or discontinue a contract entirely. Basically, any chargeback a small merchant has on their record is bad. So, in all, the restaurant instructed me to file a chargeback. I wasted a ton of their time, ended up costing them in the neighborhood of $100 for the chargeback fee, and won the $3 that they should have just credited me in the first place. Well, I'm not sure what else there is to say about this story besides the fact that you don't mess with bacon. That's like the worst thing you could do, come on. It is interesting to hear in one of the comments below this story that OP still goes to this restaurant even after this whole fiasco. I don't know if I would trust the restaurant anymore after making them pay $100 for a chargeback, but I'd love to know your guys' comments. Comment down below, would you still go to a restaurant that you did that to? Or would you kind of avoid it because you wouldn't know what they were going to do to your food? Our next story today comes to us from Hadak Ura. I was told to do what an exec told me in a precast concrete plant. Let's jump right in. Some background first, I worked for a precast concrete company as a job in between high school and college. The job sucked, but it paid well. We made a lot of the massive storm culverts and tunnel pieces that are dropped in place during construction instead of being made where they are. To put this in perspective, our largest casting form could handle pieces 40 feet by 30 feet. Absolutely massive pieces. After a few weeks of working for this company, I was trained to run the industrial concrete mixer and did this every day. This mixer was 3 stories tall, mixed up to 4.5 cubic yards of concrete at a time, and was the most beat up machine in the entire plant, which was saying something. It ran 6 days a week, 2 shifts a day, and was never maintained because the company couldn't get the techs to come out on Sunday, its only day not running, and didn't want to lose a work shift to get it maintained. The only good thing about it was that all the materials were weighed and fed in automatically. All it took was a button to start the process. The most common problem was the bottom release door not sealing correctly. It would be just barely cracked, allowing all the water to run out of it, resulting in an unusable chunky mess that would need to be dumped in a scrap hole instead of being used. If this happened, the mess needed to be dumped out of the mixer quickly before it could partially harden inside the mixer. This only happened once that I was there, and it took an entire shift to chisel the stuff out. We put a mark into the sliding door to show where it should be versus where it would be when it didn't seal. The process worked like this. A cage of rebar and anchor points was constructed on a base, around a core, and a form bolted around it. The QA guy signed off, and the form was then filled with concrete and left to cure. The curing time largely depends on the ambient temperature. The hotter it is, the faster it cures, and vice versa. Once the piece is cured enough to be lifted, the form is stripped and the piece lifted by crane off the core. Repeat until you have as many pieces ordered. Another thing to note is hard hat colors. They were color coded according to your role. Blue are plant supervisors, green QA, red the foreman, etc. For the normal workers, there was a choice of 2 colors. Yellow for people who don't know what they are doing, typically new or dumb people, and gray for those that do. This was about 5 months into my time with them, and I had just got a gray one maybe 2 months before. On to the story. Our plant was starting to produce pieces at a substantially slower rate than the other plant owned by the company. We were working 10 to 12 hour days every day to try and make up the difference. Typically, multiple pieces were made per form per day, 2 to 4. We were only managing 1 and maybe 2 per form per day. To figure out the reason for this, the owner's plan was to send an exec from the main office to observe and time every section of the process in our plant. This in itself was silly. Remember how I said the speed concrete cures is based on temperature? Our plant was in an unheated warehouse in a state bordering Canada in the winter. The other plant was in Florida. Can you guess why production was a bit slower in our plant? In any case, during the shift meeting before the exec got there, our foreman's exact words were, "Do what he tells you, otherwise stay the F away from him." Wonderful. The shift proceeds as normal, building cages and forms get bolted. Maybe 6 hours into the shift, I climb up on top of a mixer to the platform, and I am greeted by the exec in the shiniest white hard hat I had ever seen, and office attire complete with black dress shoes. In a concrete plant, laugh out loud. He looked bored out of his mind. He asked me something to the effect of if I was looking forward to the end of the shift in 2 hours. I told him that with no problems, we might get to leave in 4 hours. He got the most defeated look on his face and mumbled something that I didn't catch. I went through the pre-checks on the mixer and found the bottom door was once again not closing properly. I yelled down to the plant supervisor that the door wasn't sealing again and that the machine would be down until I got it to seal, normally by chipping the concrete left by the previous shift after using the mixer away from the opening. The plant supervisor yelled back a few choice expletives directed at the mixer and stormed into his office. The exec had a look and said he thought the door looked fine. I told him that it did this a lot and that it wasn't sealed, pointed out the mark to him, and went to get the tool I bribed a fabricator with energy drinks to make me to chip away the concrete. A braking bar welded onto a rebar shaft that I kept under the mixer itself. No more hunting down an air gun and going through the confined space lock and tagouts. Just stand on top and poke at the concrete until the door moves freely. Upon coming back with the tool, the exec told me that the seal was fine and to run it. I pointed out the same things about the door not sealing regularly. I asked if they were sure. They replied in the affirmative. I started up the mixer. The mixer regularly threw a bunch of silica up into the air. With the water draining out the bottom, this was going to get extra dusty. I offered them an extra mask that I had, and they replied that they would be fine. Well, it's not my lungs. At the same time, I noticed the plant's heavy equipment guy walking into the building and got his attention and made the hand gesture for the front loader. I got a WTF look from them, and they mouthed, "Why?" I pointed down at the mixer, repeated the gesture, and they threw up their hands and turned around. The load went into the mixer. Water started draining out the bottom. Dust goes everywhere. Go figure. The plant supervisor comes out of the office, I assume after seeing the giant cloud on the cameras, runs over and says something like, "OP, what the F are you doing?" The mixer is quite loud with concrete in it. I got the general gist though. I just pointed to the exec who was now covered in dust and staring at the water pouring out the bottom of the mixer. Never said a word. The plant supervisor's head swiveled and he just crooked a finger at the exec. The exec climbed down. They exited the building with the plant supervisor leading. The fallout. The front loader was able to get to the mixer before the mess was able to partially cure inside it. So the cleanup was as easy as dumping it into the bucket and then dumping that in the scrap hole and spraying out the mixer. We continued the shift after I chipped the concrete away from the door and got it closing properly again. Not too much time wasted, maybe an hour. The foreman asked what happened later in the shift and didn't stop laughing for the rest of it. The plant supervisor talked to me afterwards, asked what happened, and told me he didn't blame me for that dumb butt's mistakes, since he had said to do what the exec said. I never saw the exec again, and the plant supervisor never said what happened in the parking lot. I can only assume that the most this produced was angry phone calls and a lot of concrete wasted. I left about 3 months later, but I never heard anything else about slow production times from the main office. I've said it for previous stories and I'm gonna say it here again, but how do you effectively manage people and make decisions for what they're doing when you've never done their job before? Because of course, that executive makes more money and is so much smarter than all the people that have been using that equipment for years and years, right? Our next story today comes to us from Absurdity 18. You must call if you are sick, no exceptions. Let's jump right in. Our department management, in their infinite wisdom, introduced a new rule that if you were sick, you had to call and speak to your TL at least 3 hours before your shift started. No exceptions. Ever. Such was their intelligence, they announced this new super well thought out rule in one of their email blasts containing so much drivel that no one ever actually read them. They were akin to internal spam, and we joked amongst ourselves that if the company's spam filters were any good, like our marketing team spins them to be, they'd get blocked. I'll admit, ignorance is no excuse, but I was definitely one of those people who ignored these emails, so I had no idea about the rule until a few days later when I had woken up feeling unwell. Now, my shifts that week started at 6 a.m., which meant I usually woke around 4:30 a.m., so once I knew I was too unwell, I sent a "sorry, but I'm unwell today, etc." email to my TL. I should mention here that prior to this new rule, an email was perfectly okay, though there was never a firm rule about a method, just as long as it was reasonable notice. On the few occasions I'd had to call off sick before, never for a 6 a.m. start, I'd always made a phone call, an expectation from previous jobs, which I've always carried with me. This one time though, I figured, hey, it's 4:30 a.m., an email would be better received by my TL than waking up at stupid o'clock. Nope, wrong. Turns out my 4:30 a.m. email wasn't good enough, and I got my butt hauled into a meeting with HR and my TL when I was back at work the next day. Of course, I accepted that I didn't read the email with the new rule, my bad, but when I tried to put forward my point about the unreasonable time to call, I was told it was absolutely no excuse, that I should have been more responsible and called on time, that I was not being asked for my opinion on rules or policies, and that I had to follow them to the letter, or else I'd face a formal warning, etc. They weren't going to budge, and I wasn't going to make this my hill to die on, so I let them have their moment, and afterwards went back to my desk. I joked with a few colleagues that I would just set an extra alarm for 2:50 a.m. from then on, just in case. But knuckles now red from their slapping and butt now sore from their kicking, I figured I really would play HR's game if that's what they wanted. I figured if I felt sick, I'd call in by 3 a.m. Else I'd go back to sleep and wake up at my usual time. Stupid, yes, but that's the rules. A few days later, I woke up to my first alarm feeling unwell again, and knew I wasn't going to be fit for work come my scheduled start at 6 a.m. I certainly wouldn't admit to being happy, and certainly wasn't uncontrollably smiling as I picked up my phone, called up my TL, and waited for an answer. Didn't get her the first time, surprise, surprise, so I figured I'd call again, just to be sure. This time I got lucky and heard a groggy hello on the other end. I gave the formalities, told her I was off sick again, and hung up. I could tell she was positively thrilled to be woken so early, but hey, it's what they wanted. The next day, I was fine and was back at work without drama, but the next day, a stomach bug hit the office and my entire team, TL included, all rostered on for 6 a.m. starts that week, ended up leaving early. I'm sure you can paint the rest of this picture. Cue 2 days of 3 a.m. phone calls from every one of the 10 people in my team. Cue my TL getting more pissed with each one. Cue HR adding a small bit to the next week's usual drivel mail. I was sure to read this one, not rescinding the rule, but instead patting themselves on the back for coming up with the addition of sending a short email to your TL is now also a suitable form of advising illness. Such intelligence. I worked there for another 4 months before moving on to much greener pastures, and was sick only a few more occasions during that period, all of which were for 6 a.m. starts, and all of which I was sure to ring at 3 a.m. Hey, that's what the rule said. OP, I don't see a problem with continuing to call them that early in the morning. I mean, what are the chances they're gonna check their email while they're sleeping? You really want them to get that notice right away so that they can deal with it and get somebody else to cover your spot, right? Because they can totally do that at 3 a.m. Anyway, keep it up. Our next story today comes to us from Foldy Folds. Don't fix an important tool for our customer? Okay, let's jump right in. Backstory. I made the poor decision of getting a BS in mathematics and was not able to get a job upon graduation because everyone was looking for either a computer scientist or engineer. My buddy managed to hook me up with a job at a federal contractor in business management, specifically contracts. It worked out better than expected because they had many processes that could be automated and needed systems for data tracking, so I spent most of my time making tools in Excel using VBA. One of my assignments was as a liaison to our government customer, and they loved the tracker tools I made for them and the technical support I provided. We had a tool for pricing that was built in Excel and used macros. The coder was about to retire, so the pricing manager got my boss's permission to have me trained to take over as the coder. Apparently, higher up the chain, it was decided that they couldn't have a contracts person doing a pricing job, and that pricing tools group needed to take over. They made it very clear that my help and input were not welcome, and that I was to stay in my lane. The manager of the tools group made a big show of how much more expertise they have than a person in contracts. The only coder they had did Access and not Excel, so she was taking time to get familiar with the tool. I was told that I was not allowed to touch or make any changes to the tool. Now, I knew that there was an issue with the tool and I knew how to fix it. It was an ActiveX issue that I had run into with some of my other tools, including the tracker our customer used. I fixed the issue for them on the tracker. The customer also had a version of our pricing tool, so now the customer has a tool that doesn't work because of an issue they have seen me solve before. So who do they call? Cue MaliciousCompliance. I politely told them that the pricing group was taking over the tool, and I was told to stand down. Then I went for a long lunch. I returned from lunch to utter chaos. The customer had sent the pricing manager and her director a very strongly worded email explaining that they don't give a crap about our internal politics. They have an issue. The pricing group can't fix it, and I can. They demanded I be sent to fix the issue immediately, or complaints would be sent to a higher level. Complaints from the customer are taken extremely seriously, so this would be very detrimental to the pricing manager's career. I also had a frantic voicemail from the developer who was tasked by the pricing tool group with fixing the tool. She was having trouble fixing the issue. My manager gave me the go-ahead to see the customer. I was able to quickly fix the issue and make the customer happy again. A few months later, I was contacted by the pricing manager offering me a job, but I turned it down. I did eventually end up transferring to a systems engineering role, and from there to my current job as a database application developer, which I love. I don't know about you guys, but I think the best part of this story was when they took that match and lit a fire underneath the higher-ups' butts, but then promptly left for lunch. I absolutely loved that. Our next story today comes to us from Dimitri V. Make me do your safety inspection? Okay, let's jump right in. A comment in another thread about a QA inspector getting reprimanded for finding too many quality problems reminded me of this. Long ago, I worked in the back warehouse of a home decor store. Think tacky vases and such, only cheaper and worse quality junk than you're imagining. No, still worse than that. Little further, there you go. Anyway, the store manager was all about the status quo. If he was at his desk playing solitaire, things were good. If he had anything to do, they weren't. In his words, if he had to work, it's because someone else screwed up. One thing that disrupts the status quo is safety issues. Why, that might make a manager have to reach for a form or even get up from his desk. Fortunately for him, the warehouse supervisor, who was a personal friend of his, which was the only reason such a useless waste of employment could have any title other than fired, was responsible for the safety back there. So safety issues were well in hand, which is to say, ignored and dismissed. Naturally, there were many safety problems, one of them being that boxes were often stacked too close to the fire sprinklers. One day, I saw boxes actually leaning against them. I don't know how fragile those little glass fuse things are, but in addition to not wanting to die in an inferno, I also didn't want to be drenched in filthy water if someone jostled the shelf. So I said something to the supervisor, not knowing that the manager happened to be walking by behind me. That meant that something might need to be done, gasp. Naturally, the supervisor took responsibility and called a meeting to make sure everyone is aware of the law and not to do that. Just kidding, he made me move the boxes. But that wasn't enough petty punishment, he also made me responsible for the monthly facility safety inspections. The safety inspection is a full building walkthrough and check of equipment and anything safety related. Fire exits, ladders, pallet jacks, and so on. Or, if you're a spineless, half-witted beneficiary of nepotism, lazily walking around holding a clipboard and your phone, only paying attention to the latter, probably forwarding lame jokes to friends you think you have, and pencil whipping the safety part, he saw it as pointless busy work, and undoubtedly thought it would be the same for me. But here's the thing, if you sign off that something faulty is okay, then there's an incident and someone gets hurt, you can be responsible because you signed off on it. Well, I'm not about to have that fall on my shoulders. You want a safety inspection? I will perform a safety inspection. I tested every emergency light in the building. Half of them were dead. Fire extinguishers not serviced at the regular intervals? Noted. More boxes close to fire sprinklers? Documented with pictures. Inadequately stocked first aid kits? Written down. No safety pins on pallet racks? That's not up to code. Shot wheel bearings on hand trucks? Why, a wheel could catch and tip a load on someone. We can't have that. I asked coworkers for anything they knew of. Thanks, I hadn't seen that broken weld on a railing. Supervisor Boy's inspections took him a few minutes. Mine was close to 2 hours. The second best part of all this, the safety inspection reports went to corporate. A smarter idiot might have wanted to check mine first, but it never occurred to the useless supervisor. Even he would have noticed the supplemental pages stapled to mine. Corporate sure did. And the best part, responsibility for fixing every single issue fell on him and on the manager to make sure it was done. As a bonus, even they knew better than to retaliate against me right after I documented safety issues in writing to corporate. And because it would look bad to pencil whip documented issues or not take care of them before the next inspection, Supervisor Boy had a lot of work to do that month. For some reason, he didn't want me to do the safety inspections anymore. Well, OP, honestly, I think you might have helped save somebody's life. You may not know it right away, but down the road, it definitely could be a thing. You know why? All safety regulations have a story behind them. There's a reason they became a safety regulation, written in somebody else's blood. Not good. Our next story today comes to us from Peace in Greece. Let me go? Fine. You'll lose millions. Let's jump right in. This was around 10 years ago. I've always been very technically minded and was able to read blueprints, construct complex devices, weld, MIG, TIG, stick, certified in fact among other things. I took a high-paying job with a company that made several things for railroads. The job entailed most of my skills I mentioned above. It was a very small department. In fact, there were only 2 to 3 of us, but we got along great and challenged each other, which led to higher production. Sadly, the one other guy in my department left for a better job, which left me by myself. My supervisor was great as well, liked to joke around with me, left me alone to focus on my work, and had my back when I needed him. We actually assembled signal enclosures and mast and ladder houses for railroads. Fast forward to 3 years later, and the owners buy a much bigger location and move the whole company. As you might expect, several departments get shuffled. Yep, my department gets folded into a completely different department that has no clue what I do. At first, it was fine, but it starts to go pear-shaped pretty quickly. My new supervisor seemed good at first, but I quickly realized he's a snake in the grass. For example, I had to help the prototype department assemble a new, lighter type of mast and ladder house. So I'm printing out issues and suggesting fixes, etc. New supervisor is not happy. He keeps coming over huffing, groaning under his breath, standing over my shoulder, etc. He finally interrupts and asks in an angry voice, "How much longer will this take?" I respond, "I have 4 more hours today and 8 hours every day after that." He looks puzzled, so I explain, "This is my department, this is where I work. These are my responsibilities. So if it takes 2 months, that's how long it takes." Almost as if to get the last word in, he says, "You work where and when I tell you," and storms off. Next day, I'm called into the office and they force me to sign a letter that states I now work in my new supervisor's department. Fine by me, I watch from a distance in my new department as all the stock, hardware, parts, orders, etc. of my old department begin to rack up. And since I'm the only one that works in that department, or rather, used to work in that department, laugh out loud, nobody is doing a thing about it. After about 2 weeks, my old department is a disaster, with items being thrown wherever they would fit. Orders had begun to miss deadlines and higher-ups wanted answers. Sure enough, I get called into the office where the new supervisor blames me for everything, but wouldn't let me get a word in. Of course, they let me go without any reason or paperwork. The look of relief on my new ex-supervisor's face when I walk out was priceless. He had no clue what was coming. I leave with a smile plastered to my face because I knew something they didn't. I was the only one that knew how to build the mast and ladder structures. I relaxed at home for around 2 weeks because I knew I would be getting a call from them. I ignore the first dozen calls. Then I answer, "Can you come back and build, train new hires, etc. for your department?" "Sure," I said, "for $20,000. Now, that may seem like a lot, but it wasn't. They made millions from these, so there really was only one option. Pay me $20,000 or lose millions. Long story short, they went back and forth with me, but finally conceded. I received $20,000 for 2 days' work, and they were helpless. The cherry on top was my new ex-supervisor was fired for being a nitwit and costing the company $20,000. So OP was asked down in the comments if this was a one-off or they kept working there now that the ex-sup was gone, and OP said no, they just wanted them there for 2 days to catch up on builds and training the new guys they hired. So that kind of leads me to wonder, they caught up on 4 weeks of production and trained the new guy in 2 days? Interesting. So I'm gonna leave it up to you guys to let me know what you think the validity of this story is. Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story today comes to us from Ladybug Whisperer. Forgive me, officer, of course you know how to do your job. Let's jump right in. So this happened back around the end of 2018. I worked for a supported community living (SCL) company. My day-to-day consisted of assisting clients with developmental disabilities perform daily tasks, such as administering medication, toileting, and transportation. But a major part of what I did was behavior de-escalation. Many individuals that are part of the IDD, intellectually developmentally disabled community, have behavioral issues that range from harmless to extremely violent. I sincerely enjoyed this part of my job. At times it was dangerous, but you would always learn so much from trying to help them regulate their emotions. A behavior is just them trying to communicate a want or a need that they have. They just don't know how to use their words sometimes. On this particular day, the client that I was closest to had a meltdown, punched holes in the wall, tore a blackboard off the wall, pushed over a large cabinet, stripped naked, threw fecal matter, the works. Mind you, this was actually pretty common for them, especially around wintertime when they missed their family. Eventually, after hours of trying on our own to calm them down, we had to call the police. When they arrived, 3 officers, 2 very kind ones, and then an arrogant bastard, my client became sort of quiet and compliant. I knew from years of working with them that definitely was not a good sign. My supervisor also noticed this, and as we told them to watch out, the arrogant bastard stated, "We know how to do our jobs, ma'am." Cue malicious compliance. So I, being the dutiful citizen I am, shut my mouth, and my supervisor did the same. We watched the client edge closer as the officers were speaking to them. I should mention, they were able to get the client to put on clothes before this. When they were within arm's reach, my client made their move. As fast as lightning, my client reached their hands down into their pants and proceeded to slap the arrogant bastard in the face with their crap-covered hand. At that point, it was assault on an officer, so they swiftly cuffed them and sent them to a holding cell at the sheriff's department until they had calmed down enough to be released. Being part of the IDD community prevented them from pressing any kind of charges on my client, so they got off pretty easy. The arrogant bastard, on the other hand, ended up with pink eye for 2 weeks. I found out later on from a state trooper friend that he was pretty disliked in general, so it made for a good laugh for them as well. Well, it seems to me that officers number 1 and officer number 3 were doing their job perfectly fine. The real trouble was caused by number 2. Our next story today comes to us from Toros Prime. Want my entire department platinum certified? Sure thing. What time do you want to do the peer mentoring? Let's jump right in. So I was reminded of this recently, though the specific incident occurred almost 6 years ago. See, the company I worked for at the time had a tiered training system. Bronze tier meant you were qualified to do your job. Silver meant you'd gone the extra mile to really learn the ins and outs of the job and could be used to train new people in your job. Gold meant you had mastered your current position, and platinum was generally intended to be the stepping stone to be cross-trained in different departments. Typically, platinum training in one department was roughly equivalent to half silver in 2 or 3 other departments. So like, being platinum trained in repair agent meant you could lend a hand in home installation and car installation, that sort of thing. Well, my store manager decided he wanted to get the bragging rights of having his entire Geek Squad department platinum certified. So he started hounding us to do our platinum certifications, not actually giving us time to do them, mind you, because outside of bronze, the trainings were voluntary. The position I held at the time, its platinum level training was intended to be a stepping stop into management, and as a part of that, it included several transcripts from several books on management. So to be platinum certified, I had to finish 14 modules, with each module involving a 200 to 400 page reading assignment, followed by a report on the reading assignment to be graded by the manager, and also 4 one-on-one training sessions with the store manager on topic such as manpower management, customer reading, and personality conflicts. All in all, each module was estimated to take between 10 to 14 hours worth of work before a further 3 to 4 hours of work with the manager. This was all something that the manager was apparently unaware of, because when I asked him where he wanted me to turn in the first report, he brushed me off, saying the modules don't have assignments, only to have him come back 3 more times and get on my case and the rest of my department's case about being platinum. But then, inferring that he's not going to read the assignments and sign off on the modules, so do this training that I won't sign off on, and do it on your own time. Surprise, surprise, we weren't interested in wasting our personal time like this, so initially we ignored it. until he really started pushing the issue. Remember how each of the modules for the Platinum training for my position had a 200 to 400 page reading assignment? Well, using the store's printer, I printed each one of them in color, actually did the reading of the first one and wrote the paper, and went to talk to the manager about the report. I hounded him for a week about it until I was able to corner him and show it was about the Platinum training. He was totally caught off guard that he was expected to play school teacher and visibly horrified that he would have to do so for 14 modules, plus 4 one-on-one sessions for 5 people. So that was the last we heard about him demanding everyone in the department be Platinum. Remember how I printed out the readings? Well, that prompted an investigation to find out why the store had gone through more color toner in 2 months than it had in a year prior. They eventually found that the majority was from the Platinum learnings, and when they asked why, we pulled out the multiple email messages the store manager has sent us regarding Platinum, including the parts where he said if we needed to print something, we could use the store printers. Turns out, most of the Platinum modules have just a 2 to 3 page worksheet and maybe a checklist. Some have a 20 to 30 page resource document, but only the Platinum for my department had 300 page books. Something to mention for anybody else who finds themselves in a situation like this is that it's very illegal, very against labor laws, for them require you to do company certified training on your own time. That's something you should be paid for, especially when they're telling you that you have to do it. Now, that bit of information won't help OP because they did say that it happened about 6 years ago, but hopefully it helps somebody else when they find themselves in the same spot. Our next story today comes to us from Mr. CTO. Quit toxic workplace, as I was not in company values and left none of my knowledge behind. Let's jump right in. This was during my previous workplace where I worked more than half a decade. By the time I left, I was in the top 3 personnel of seniority and knowledge, and the most technical system user out of hundreds and hundreds of people. I have done it all, everything from A to Z, operations, HR, finance, supply chain, etc. You name it. Anyway, I decided to leave as leadership had changed and everything was going downhill fast. My progression had slowed down, and I was not allowed to progress for another 2 to 3 years, depending on how I behave. It took me quite some time to find my current job and take this step. However, up to the moment of leaving, my new director, tried to play a power move in a one-on-one meeting and say that I am not a team player. If I don't like it, I should go. It's okay if I want to go, and he would understand. My colleagues are saying I am not supportive, etc. This was due to the fact I called him out on nonsense and others, was not afraid to speak my mind on poorly made decisions, and had to protect my team from his and other manager mistakes. I'd rather take the hit than my team. Meeting got quite heated, but kept my cool, and he proposed to meet in an hour or so to think and discuss how I will change and what is my project for this year. In simple words, what extra you will do for the same salary because we don't like you and want to pay you a lot less. Fine, let's meet in 1 hour. I considered quitting on the spot because that would cause absolutely massive issues, but I decided to treat him the same way I was treated, and my team shouldn't suffer from his stupidity. Cue malicious compliance first time. I came back to the meeting and spewed out the biggest, vilest nonsense I could come up with that he wanted to hear. Oh jolly me, happy days, I am a yes man. Came up with random projects and the values I really want to contribute, yada yada. Really gave the effort in my emotions whilst discussing and making this place the best workplace ever, working during my days off and overtimes to succeed. I am in it for all to redeem my poor values. I could have involved HR and sorted it out differently, but this was way better. Anyway, the wanker sort of bites my nonsense and goes with it, giving me a last chance to redeem myself. Not sure what I am redeeming, it's him who did not like me, but he is not a complete moron, so probably he had some doubts. So after leaving the room, I started the new happy yes man me transformation. I said absolutely nothing to anyone leaving because I am fully aware how things can spread around. So in meantime, I had a few interviews and one place caught my eye. They caught me and we had good communication. I was waiting for a final interview. Things were still going downhill and my moron director was being a butt more than usual. I couldn't wait to drop my resignation letter on the table. Cue malicious compliance second time. I knew my last days here are approaching and was hoping I'd get out soon. Unfortunately, we had another lengthy one-on-one and he still wasn't happy with everything I do. And I should do more and better, especially with my type of experience. So I took upon more things. Realistically speaking, I would need at least one more person with exactly the same knowledge as I have to barely manage everything within my contracted hours. Worry not, I am a yes man, all the new projects and responsibilities. On the next day, I checked my holidays at the end of the month. If everything is correctly booked as I was hoping, I would give my notice and only have to work half of it due to holidays. That is, if I get offered the new position. Hours later, I get an email with a new contract and I am starting in a month. I did not want to send the email on the weekend about my resignation as I wanted to see his face when I hand him the letter. Waited for Monday, asked if he has a moment, and gave a well-presented letter with my resignation. He asked with a curiously stupid smile, "What is this?" "Well, I don't know. How about you open it up?" I said. "Have a look." To which he came back with, "I can't wait. You can tell me." Wow, the cringe. So after not saying anything, he opens it up, and suddenly from the almighty warrior, and most of the time yelling at everyone, he turns pale, scared, and barely whispering, oh wow, yes, that is my resignation letter. I give my notice now and will send over email. If there's anything you want to discuss, please schedule a meeting. Oh, yes, we definitely have to talk. So I had an exit interview, where all of a sudden, he tried to be nicer, not raising his voice and very concerned about what I am doing. The exit interview was a walk around the facility with some casual questions that I gave vague answers to. Was no point explaining anything more as his manager was and is on the same stupidity level and nothing would change. Cue malicious compliance last time. I inquired before me going on annual leave and also not coming back if there's anything else I can support with. No, just leave your laptop and access card. Are you sure? There is nothing else? Yeah. Great. Guess you don't need access to dozens of files that everyone uses that are under my management, as well as a detailed yearly, monthly, weekly, and even daily forecast of activity, hours, holidays, and so on. Forecasts and such were my individual files. The commonly used one was very poor and not detailed at all. Colleague who took over thought she knows what I was doing, but had no idea it would be that hard and failed miserably. So I gave my team all the holidays and shifts they wanted, whenever they wanted, made schedule for at least 1 month in advance so they don't have to suffer, as I know after I leave they would be lucky to have schedule for even the same week, and removed all access from the files I owned and deleted after. Ensured there is no trace of backup of them anywhere, and even formatted the SSD so nothing could be easily recovered even if anyone tried. Last day of my employment, came in, dropped everything off, and left. Heard of aftermath straight away as suddenly department spiraled in delays, forecast was not accurate, scheduling did not match activity requirements, nobody working on projects, IT couldn't access my computer for whatever reasons as well, and could not recover any files. Their delay got so massive, it would actually take months to recover with the right resources, whilst even not respecting KPIs. There were a lot of technical issues nobody knew how to sort out either. In the end, they had to spend a lot more for extra staff and even technical IT support to do basic things. Most of management team left after I left, and a lot of team members resigned. Rough estimate is that they will lose millions over the next years regarding how everything is managed and have lost already a lot. Now, it was mentioned many times down below in the comments that OP probably committed a felony here by deleting and altering files on a company computer with the intent to cause harm to the company. That is not something you want to do, and that could definitely end up with jail time. Our next story today comes to us from, 00964567886543334. Sure, I'll do my job. Let's jump right in. My sister told me I should post this story. I'm a young person working in a backroom position at a retail store. I've been working there for about a year now. My management when I started was excellent, and as a result, I am very well trained. I never got written up, am always on time, and I constantly do things well above my pay grade. I fill in for my supervisor in the back room and can run it by myself if need be, and I trained our newest supervisor in her position. If you're wondering, I didn't take the supervisor job because it required changing my shift time. I knew all the fine details and was a team trainer as well. Basically, I was a supervisor but without the pay raise. My managers moved on to greener pastures and their positions were filled by new management. The new management doesn't compare to the quality of the old management. Our store manager, I'll call her Karen, is the worst manager I've had the displeasure of working for. She loves workplace politics, acting snaky and micromanaging everything. When suggested solutions to problems, Karen would rather take a less effective route just to be the one in charge. When she messes up, instead of admitting it, Karen blames anyone but herself and makes it their responsibility to avoid looking dumb. Karen doesn't help when she's needed, rarely does her job, takes personal phone calls all day, and sits in her office on her computer. She's rude, inconsiderate, and incompetent. All in all, Karen is an awful boss. I tried to make peace with Karen at first, but we quickly started bumping heads, and our relationship is shaky at best. We're cordial with each other, but Karen wanted me to abandon 100% of my authority while still running the back, which couldn't happen because others come to me for direction a lot. We don't speak to each other when we don't have to. Well, Karen screwed up. One day in the back, we finished with a group activity. Simply put, I had to pee. So once we were done, I told my supervisor I needed a quick bathroom break and headed out to the bathroom. The second I began my business, I got called on the intercom by Karen to come to the back room. I finished up quickly and got back to the stockroom. I was gone about 2 to 5 minutes tops. When I walked in, Karen was immediately interrogating me on where I'd been and what I was doing. I told her I'd gone to the bathroom, and she continued asking, like the answer was gonna be different. Eventually, Karen said this absolute gem to me, which she couldn't have known would change the course of our time at this company forever. Karen says, "You need to use company time more wisely and do your job." Okay. Remember how I said I was basically the backup stock supervisor at this institution? My list of self-appointed management duties was actually pretty long. Training new people, fixing damaged items, fixing packaging, training the supervisors, doing paperwork, delegating tasks, giving instructions to people, taking garbages out, cleaning the stockroom, the list goes on and on. When Karen said this to me, something clicked. You see where this is going? I stopped all of it. All the managerial stuff went right out the window. Do my job? Okay, I'll do my job. Not your job, not her job, only mine. That's what you asked, right? Direct your own team, do your own paperwork, train your own supervisors, cause I'm just a lowly waggy, right? Yep, my stockroom fell apart quickly. Suddenly, the entire room was in disarray. New people weren't being trained, faulty product was put out, my new supervisor had no idea what to do other than copy me, so none of the paperwork got done. Garbages stopped being taken, people in the stockroom didn't have direction, the floors were dirty, etc. I wonder why. It was a mess, and management couldn't say anything about it, because those were management's duties, and not my problem. I know that Karen knew what I did, but all she could do was silently fume about it, suck it up, and actually do her job. She got pissy with me after this and tried giving me less shifts, but that didn't last. Management finally got involved with the stockroom. I've never been so satisfied with myself, all because Karen couldn't accept that I had to pee. What are you gonna do? Fire me for doing my job? Laughing my butt off. Well, OP, at this point you just tell management that you're not going to do any of those other things until you get your promotion with your new title and the raise that comes with it. Otherwise, you can just sit back and watch the whole place burn. Our next story today comes to us from Insomniac I want you to leave. Okay, let's jump right in. So this probably happened around 10 years ago, maybe a bit less than that. I'm living in Europe and I was a uni student at that time. No regular job, so I used to work with some temp job agencies which used to let me know when any work came up to see if I'm up for it. Nothing too interesting. Most of the time it was a company that had to do a yearly inventory and needed extra workers to do some repetitive, soul-crushing tasks like counting number of screws in the bins and separating them into said bins based on their type. Quite literally that, to be honest, laugh out loud. The main problem was that for small locations, it often lasted only a day or even a couple of hours, so the pay was poor at best. But hey, as long as they pay something, it's a step forward for a young student. One time, I got a comfortable offer to participate in a preparation for such inventory, and a good aspect of it was that preparation was planned for 2 weeks as they had quite an extensive stock. And it wasn't just me who was hired. There probably was like 24 of extra little helpers. Boy, we're going to get rich. For a few first days, it was going pretty well. We were usually working in pairs for various departments around the store. Each of those departments had a supervisor or two who, well, supervised our work and gave us tasks. During those first few days, I was working for some nice guys, same department all the time. And let me digress for a second here. For the purpose of the story, you should know that I pay great attention to the details and am pretty hardworking. So whatever it is I'm doing, I'm always giving my best, even if the task is tedious. And it was no different at this job. However, let's get back to the topic. So I'm working for this department, and after a few hours or so, I asked the guys, supervisors, if they have anything against me listening to some music on my earphones. They were cool with that, as I was not engaging with any other employees unless I was reporting that I finished a certain task, and I'm ready for the next one. If a customer approached me, I was to direct him to actual workers from the given department. So that's how a few days went by. Supervisors were very happy with the work I did, and I was happy I could make the time fly faster with the help from my white MP3 player that seems ancient nowadays. Honestly, still after those years, it feels nice to remember daily compliments from these very guys. Good feedback, good guidance, good managerial material, might I add now, when I have much more work experience in various roles. But obviously, all the good things come to an end, and I started to get transferred between various departments after a few days. We had quite a lot of extra workers, so once the main departments were more or less done with, we were just moved around to help where we were needed. And this is where I realized that most of the helpers didn't really bother to work as well as the others. There's been some of us who played ball in the store's alleys, and some were just chilling 15 minutes after every task, since they were so exhausted from all the work they haven't done yet. Well, screw them. I'm just gonna do my thing and keep looking for work. Time flies faster that way anyway, so why wouldn't I? And this is where I met the crappy supervisor that set the bar for the next few years. This guy clearly was just given too much power, and he liked to remind others that he is the one in charge here, in his one single department in a huge store. I was working for his department doing just as good of a job as before while listening to music. He didn't seem to mind that. Other helpers often did the same. But what he couldn't stand is when we were idle for even a second. Quite literally, we had to be focused on our tasks all the time. And at his department, we had to walk around a lot. So while walking, he expected us to plan ahead our next actions and evaluate how the said action should be performed. I wish I was exaggerating, but sadly, I'm not. I had a couple unpleasant remarks from him before. All of them were ridiculous, but still, I was trying to work even harder to appease him. But I just had enough when he approached me another time. I was walking between stations in order to pick up some price tags that I needed to stick to the shelves in another part of the department. And while I was walking, I dared to take out my MP3 player and skip a song I didn't like. This is when he went too far and started yelling at me, saying that I'm not paid to F around and I'm supposed to work. He was kind of aggressive and we ended up yelling a bit at each other, as I was feeling angry having seen what other helpers were doing compared to me. He said he called me out multiple times and I should just leave if that's my attitude towards this work. So I did. I just turned around, walked to break room to sign out on the timesheet, and left the store without hesitation. Still, we were only halfway through my employment there, and I was waging on my options after I stormed out. Not showing up at work on the following day would be admitting that I was to blame. Similarly, if I contacted the temp agency or the company trying to sort it out, it would feel like I need to explain myself, even though I don't believe I did anything wrong. And to top that, I could be blacklisted by the agency, so no more work for me after company reports my behavior. So I did what I thought was best, just showed up at work at 8 as every other day before. As usually, all of the helpers formed a neat line in the break room to get their assignments for the beginning of the day, and I was the middle of the line. Assignments were given by another supervisor who was responsible for all the extra helpers brought in through temp agency. You could tell that all the other helpers were eager to see what they were going to do to me since the news spread yesterday. I expected to be fired on the spot. Honestly, I was just hoping that they wouldn't try to F with my pay thus far. Anyway, briefing goes on and the supervisor lady gets to me, stops for a second and clearly hesitates. "Didn't you leave yesterday?" I did as I was told by my department supervisor, but it's not me who has reasons to not show up for work today. I still have a contract for another week, and I'm not planning to abandon it. The lady stood there for a few more seconds, then just nodded, gave me my assignment, and carried on with the briefing. For the remaining week, I was working in various departments, but never in the one with the crappy supervisor. Not just that, but I was also assigned to my original department a couple more times, and for some reason, they had even more good things to say about my performance than before. To be fair, OP, they asked you to leave, but I don't think they said not to come back, so you were just doing exactly as you were told. The only other comment I have on this one is that if OP knew they were switching from one department to another, and knew they would be under a different supervisor, that running the idea of using their headphones and listening to music while they were doing their job was something they probably should have brought up with that new supervisor. But I digress, it went down and OP won in the end. Our next story today comes to us from I am Jay, Jay is me. Don't want to sit inside even though a storm is coming? Okay, let's jump right in. This happened to me a few years ago and I just remembered it recently. I was working at a restaurant waiting tables in a very affluent area on the Jersey Shore. We had our fair share of entitled people who were under the impression that if you throw enough money around, you can do whatever you want and treat people however you want. And when your income depends on their tips, you kind of just have to deal with it. The restaurant had an outdoor dining and bar area that overlooked the ocean with an amazing view. During the summer, this was pretty much where everyone wanted to sit rather than our indoor dining area. And for anyone who works someplace with outdoor dining, you know the one monkey wrench that can ruin a very profitable dinner shift, the weather. No matter how accurate the forecast says it's going to be, you can never know for sure. For the most part, we never had an issue, because if it started to abruptly rain, there would usually be more than enough room inside for all the people who were sitting outside to move in. It's usually a cluster F to keep track of which table moved where, but we always handled it without any issue. Until that one day. We had a large party booked one day in our indoor area that took up more than half our tables. A 50th birthday, I believe. So our indoor capacity was limited, and even on top of the party, there were customers who were weary about the weather, so they decided to sit inside also. And then, more and more people started sitting outside. My manager did a quick assessment and realized that if it started raining, we would barely have enough room inside to accommodate everyone who was sitting outside. He told us we had to stop seating our outdoor area and to start recommending to our outdoor tables to move inside because of the impending weather to be on the safe side. Everyone's weather app was saying there was a downpour coming up the coast. Everyone was okay with it, except I had a table of 9 people who seemed fairly middle-aged and very wealthy. Margaritas with top-shelf tequila, gaudy-looking jewelry, etc., etc. Each end of the table seemed to be in their own conversation, not paying attention to the other. Upon hearing about the incoming rain, I go to the woman who I thought was in charge. She had the fakest tan of them all, and I tell her, let's call her Karen, "Ma'am, I'm really sorry, but because of the weather coming in and our limited seating inside, I'm going to have to move you folks inside so you don't get caught in the rain." This Karen is so entrenched in her conversation, she doesn't even register that I, a lowly waiter, was talking to her. So I try again. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for interrupting, but..." She cuts me off exasperated. What are you saying?" I began again. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, because of the weather coming and our inside filling up, we need to move you inside. We have a table ready for you. I can move all your drinks and everything for you." She snaps back with, "The only reason we came here was to sit outside. We'll deal with the weather." I realize she doesn't grasp what I'm saying, so I try again. "Ma'am, just in case the..." And then she goes from 0 to 100 and yells, "We'll effing deal with it." She yelled so loudly that the people on the other half of her table heard. They didn't hear our prior exchange, but only heard her outburst and went back to their conversation, assuming this must be normal behavior for her. She wants to deal with it on her own? You got it. So I began to take their order. Filet mignons, a few lobster tails, expensive crap. I put the order in and I look back and all the other tables have moved inside because they were all rational human beings. And my table of 9 entitled jerks were the only ones out there. I heard the leathery looking Karen say to the rest of the table, "Wow, we have the entire patio to ourselves. What luxury." After a while, I looked inside and saw that the table I had held for them was taken by another party that had just walked in, the last table available. And just as the last butt hit the seat, I felt the best feeling I possibly could have felt at that moment. A glorious raindrop tap on the top of my head. Oh, sweet glory. Within seconds, it went from beautiful blue skies to torrential downpour. Everyone at the table grabbed their drinks, a little watered down at this point, and ran inside. After they shook themselves dry, they looked around and realized there was nowhere for them to sit. Most of them looked dumbfounded, like a lost child in a supermarket. Karen makes a beeline to me and screams, "We need a table." I reply, "I'm sorry, ma'am. We're fully seated and on a wait for our indoor seating." Maybe one table on the waiting list, but a list is a list. "Well, what are we supposed to do now?" she hawked back at me, which led to me so eloquently saying, "Ma'am, as you said you would, you effing deal with it." I air quoted the effing deal with it to really emphasize that that was her response. And as I said that, everyone else at the table realized that was our interaction earlier and Karen had dug their graves. I felt bad for most of them because if they had all known the circumstances, they probably would have convinced Karen to move in, but after she raised her voice and cursed at me, all bets were off. And as serendipity would have it, at that moment, their food came out and we handed it to them. There they were, 9 people in damp clothes, holding a Cosmo in one hand and filet mignon in another with nowhere to sit and eat. The rest of her party convinced her to just get some boxes for their food and pay their check and leave. As I hand Karen the check, she smugly says, "Well, this will be reflected in your tip." To which I replied, "Ma'am, we implement a 20% tip on parties of 8 or more. It's our policy, and it's clearly stated in our menu." She paid, and then they left with their boxed up food, leaving behind their half-full drinks. Best $60 I ever made. Well, heck, OP, how dare you not stop the rain from falling on Karen's precious head? I absolutely love how you just bee-slapped her right back with the 20% tip already baked into their charge. Wow. Our next story today comes to us from Mia Dandier. You want to discuss my hair in a performance meeting? By all means, let's jump right in. About 8 years ago, I used to work as a store assistant in a UK-based chain of electronics stores. The old store manager who hired me was lovely. The new manager who replaced him, Sally, was an arsehole who loved going on a power trip. Not only did she have no technology knowledge to actually help customers, she would have favorites and personally pick on people she did not like. The people were the assistant manager that she was trying to push out, a colleague who was neurodivergent, and myself. I suspect the reason she didn't like me was because she was obese and permanently on some sort of fad diet, whilst I had a weirdly high metabolism and sometimes ate McDonald's for lunch. She shirked her responsibilities at work constantly to go on her phone. None of us were allowed our phones on the shop floor. Took multiple breaks and even went out to get her nails redone during her shift because she chipped one on a shelf. On to the story. The main excuse she used to pick on me was that my hair was untidy. My hair was dry, wavy, and has a naturally coarse texture. Thanks, Mom. I had a shower each morning, clean uniform, and brushed my hair before work, which is all that I was willing to do for a minimum wage job. After receiving 2 uniform warnings for my untidy and unhygienic natural hair, the third warning resulted in a performance review meeting, aka try not to get fired. I was very depressed at the time and did not have the energy nor resources to find another job. Plus, I liked my colleagues, who were onto her BS, so I didn't want to leave at the time. The assistant manager briefed me on what would happen during the meeting and told me that he would need to ask me some pre-assigned questions, and Sally would need to transcribe everything said down into my personal file. Cue malicious compliance. Sally had these long, fake nails that made it difficult for her to type. The meeting was meant to last 20 minutes max. The night before, I prepared everything I was going to say about how my hair was naturally wavy and coarse, with strong hints about racial discrimination thrown in. I'm Southeast Asian. Humorous anecdotes about how difficult my hair has been to manage, and my entire hygiene routine in step-by-step detail. I even brought my hairbrush with me. I answered all questions in protracted detail using the full extent of the English language and thesaurus.com, and watched her struggle to keep up with the dialogue and ask us to slow down in order to type everything, including the words pubic hair head that I used to describe my own hair texture. After over an hour of this and me running out of material and adding colorful flourishes, she called for a break. The assistant manager pulled me aside at the break and told me she was furious. We resumed the meeting after the break, and she proposed that I tie my hair into a ponytail going forward, which I agreed to as she was red in the face from anger, and I was struggling to maintain my straight face at that point. I never got another uniform warning after that. Myself and the assistant manager reported her to HR, resulting in the store being audited twice in 3 months. A few months later, I left. A couple of years later, the company went bust. Sally is still a store manager, but somewhere else. I'm now a risk manager with bright purple hair at an employer that pays well and doesn't care about my hair, only my quality of work. It never ceases to amaze me how many different subreddits there are on Reddit for all different kinds of things. And in the comments of this one, there was many mentions of a subreddit called r/curly girl, which has many suggestions on how to deal with all those curls that you might have. So OP's now been sent this one so that they can take care of their curly hair in a way that won't make it a big poof. Our next story today comes to us from Abe30303. Oh, you want my files today? Sure, let's jump right in. I was litigating against a large corporation pro se in federal civil court, and literally all of my discovery was stuff that the company I was suing had given to me in a lower court. Now, mind you, this is federal court, so since I knew all my evidence for the case had to come from that company, I didn't give over the file since they already possessed it. Their attorney tried to get sanctions. Judge told me to just send them the file by the deadline. So on the last day, literally on the 11th hour, I fully complied with the federal order mandating that I send in my whole discovery package. I sent the 400 pages via email, certified mail, and fax. Here's the kicker. I had virtual fax while the law firm had a traditional fax machine. For those of you who do not understand the implication of this, a traditional fax machine can only hold 150 pages, while digital fax service is literally unlimited. Traditional fax machines will throw an error if the machine runs out of paper. Digital fax service will reattempt a delivery until the fax service or machine transmits a code indicating success. And traditional machines, FYI, are SLOW. Several hours into the next day, I got a call from the opposing counsel asking me to stop sending them the same 150 pages. The law firm had exactly one fax machine. Every time the fax machine ran out of paper, a bored paralegal would stop by, fill the hopper with more paper, and walk away. Problem is that this tied up the machine all day, and the firm was left unable to receive inbound faxes until my job was complete. I couldn't stop the faxes because it was the third-party fax service that was the problem. I got more calls, increasingly pleading and frantic in tone, and had to explain the situation. Because the fax service was digital and nobody was aware of the limitations physical fax machines had, they didn't put a limit on the number of attempts to resend the fax. Because maybe no one in their right mind will send 400 pages in this day and age of email. So this law firm literally had no choice but to either shut down their fax line for the few days that it took the fax service to fix their code, or pay a paralegal big bucks to do nothing but babysit the fax line and continuously refill the hopper through my 400-page fax. Malicious compliance all the way, baby. Don't piss off a software engineer because ruinous problems might arise. Ah yes, this story was just the facts, the whole facts, and nothing but the facts. And OP just stood back at the end and said, "I've no more facts to give. My facts have runneth dry." Our next story today comes to us from Uranium Snail. Don't want to pay me overtime? I don't think that will work the way you think it will. Let's jump right in. Background. Many years ago, I worked for a large multinational software hardware consulting place that you will have heard of. We'll call them Employer. On this particular assignment, I was a small cog in a 300+ person project to run many of the IT systems of a major telecoms company. My particular responsibility was application support for the customer care area. This covered an internal web app that the client's help desk used to look up customer details, do upgrades, refunds, address changes, etc., as well as the public FAQ website and the email ticketing system used to communicate with their customers. Most of this software was written by the 15-person dev team that sat a few short steps away from my desk, who were largely great to deal with. I joined just as the first very small release went live, and with each new release, they added more features and more help desk people. So at the start, there were 2 of us supporting this app, with the idea that as more releases and features were added and the workload increased, they would add more people to the team to help out. Workload increases. So after a few months, we've had the first 2 software releases, the number of users is ramping up, and we are having more and more tickets to deal with. At this point though, the other guy on the team whispered in a few managers' ears and got transferred to one of the other work streams, but no one thought to replace him with anyone else. So now, it was just me doing all the support by myself, which had the inevitable consequence of wait times for tickets going up. As an example, I had a very nice lady from one of the other support teams come over and politely ask me when I might get a chance to look at the ticket she had raised. The conversation went something like this. "Hi there, I have a question about a ticket assigned to you." "Sure, what's the ticket number?" 123456. "We need you to implement it before we can add some feature. Do you think you can look at it in the next few days?" "Ah, it's a Sev 3. Sev meaning severity, where Sev 1 is a system outage, Sev 2 is urgent but not critical, Sev 3 is basically the default, and Sev 4 is nice to have. I then do some maths in my head, thinking of all the other things higher priority than a Sev 3, and reply 4 weeks. Slightly stunned blank look. That's if there are no Sev 1 outages for the next month, and no one raises any more Sev 2s. Oh, and we are averaging 3 Sev 1s per week right now. Oh, is there anyone else I can talk to? No, sorry, it's just me. That's why it'll take 4 weeks. Polite lady wanders off. The reality, of course, is that I would never get to look at a Sev 3, which I think she realized. On-call rota. Since there were public-facing elements to the system, we also had an on-call rota in case of out-of-hours problems. There was a shared support phone, which I think was a Nokia 3310, whose ringtone still gives me PTSD when I hear it. The rota consisted of me and the guy who left for the other team, as he still wanted to pull in some extra cash. You see, for all its failings, Employer actually had a really good overtime setup, which included the on-call time. We'd alternate each week, starting on Monday evening, and then being on call for all the time we were not in the office until the following Monday. So if I was in the office for 8 hours, then I'd be on call for 16, then work for 8, back on call for 16, etc. So doing a 40-hour week, I'd be on call for about 128 hours. We'd get paid 1/4 of our hourly rate for being on call, but then there's a bonus multiplier depending on if it's a regular work night, weekend, or bank holiday. So I was basically doubling my salary thanks to the on-call gravy train. I mean, the 2 a.m. callouts were not much fun, especially when you have to work for 5 hours to get the system back up again, then come back in the next day to deal with the fallout, but the money was good and I was young. I wasn't really doing much overtime other than the on-call and callouts, as when you are repeatedly called out in the middle of the night, you don't much feel like going the extra mile the rest of the time. I was doing enough that we very rarely had an outage during the day, but didn't have time to do anything proactive or think about long-term improvements. I could only just keep my head above water. I think the number of Sev 2s was actually increasing over time, and dealing with a Sev 3 was only a dream. I'd occasionally have a meeting with one of the 3 service managers I reported to, who'd moan a little about the number of old open tickets, but I'd just ask them what my priority should be, and they'd concede I was doing the right thing. And yes, I reported to 3 managers, which worked about as well as you'd expect. But that's for another time. Email from management. I arrived to work one day, and I'm stopped by one of the support people from another team. Have you seen the announcement? What announcement? Check your email. This happens at least 3 times before I've even gotten to my desk. I'm now intrigued and slightly fearful about what I might find. Has the project been canned? Are we going to get the project away day that has been rumored for months? My laptop has never taken so long to boot up, but when it does, the news is not good. Overtime payments are over. Starting in 2 months' time, all overtime will be compensated by time off in lieu. Toil. Yeah, that acronym is apt. No more doubling of my salary, no more nice holidays, no more, wait a sec. I've just reached the bit where they explain how the amount of toil is calculated from the amount of overtime. That can't be right. I go to the spreadsheet I use to track my hours and start making some edits based on the email. Edits complete, I start trying out some numbers. Well, what do we have here? A plan is forming. The compliance. For the next month, I do just a little bit of overtime each day, sometimes an hour, sometimes more. If we have a bad week for Sev 1s and callouts, then I don't do as much, but if we have a quiet week, then I'm staying after hours every night. A week or 2 into my new regime, I have a meeting with the service manager, and they are now a bit happier as the ticket queue has actually gone down for the first time in ages. I say nothing about the toil, and as the meeting is ending, they are actually surprised I didn't bring it up, as they have been getting an earful from all the other support people. I play it down and say that I haven't really thought about it yet, but I'm sure I'll be fine. The meeting ends with them thanking me about taking it so calmly. I just smile. After working like this for a month, it's now time for phase 2 of the plan. I book a meeting with one of the service managers and bring my laptop with the overtime spreadsheet. The meeting goes something like this. I have some concerns about the upcoming toil change. Manager suddenly bored. Do you? What are they? Well, I track my hours in this spreadsheet so that it's easier to submit my overtime payments, and I thought I'd update it to support the new toil processes. Manager slightly suspicious. Okay. Well, if you look at my hours for the past month and look at the weeks when I'm on call, then the amount of time off that the project will owe me is calculated as this much, points to a cell on the paper. Right, what's the problem? Do you not see the issue? For this week where I'm on call, I'm owed 41 hours of time off, but I'm only contracted to work 37 hours per week. Puzzled frown. What does that mean? It means that for any week that I'm on call, I'd have to take the entire next week off work, paid for by the project. No work would get done on my work stream, no tickets would be completed, no change requests, and no root cause analysis would be done. We'd only be able to do half the number of tickets that we currently do, and that's already pretty low. Not only that, but the extra few hours over my contracted hours will gradually add up, so that at some point I won't even be able to be on call for the full week. Manager's fully awake now. Take me through the maths again. Yes, you see, for the previous month, I'd been making sure that I'd done just enough overtime, clearing down tickets, that the amount of toil I would be owed under the new system would be more than my contracted hours. The service managers couldn't complain about the extra hours, as they wanted the ticket queue to go down, and the project managers couldn't complain, as this was their idea in the first place. The service manager said to leave it with him, and the meeting ended. The aftermath. 2 weeks later, an email came out from management saying that the toil change was being postponed. I'd like to think that it was all my doing, but it may have also been the fact that many of the support people were talking about getting their names off the various on-call rotas, as it wasn't really worth doing just for time off. Management couldn't just make the toil rates worse either, as they were mandated by the company, so they didn't really have a choice but to back off once they were shown the numbers. As for my work stream, the service managers seemed to get the hint, as within a few months the team had grown from just me to 4 of us. I finally had the time to do preventative maintenance, as well as spending more time talking with the development team. This eventually allowed me to move to a role that was 50-50 support and development, which started me on the path to being a full-time software developer. The on-call gravy train chugged along for another couple of years, until the whole company watered it down from 1/4 to 1/10 of the hours. The project never switched to toil. You know, it's absolutely amazing what a math-literate person and a spreadsheet can accomplish. I can't help but feel bad for the polite lady though, because her Sev 3 ticket never got dealt with, at least not that we know of. Our next story today comes to us from Prime Minister Dumbass. Need to resign because of sick leave? Sure, let's jump right in. I used to work at a grocery store. It was in this smallish beachside community that had a lot of tourists and summer homes. Chose the store because they were all about finding long-time workers and had a little bonus and salary boost for those who finished their probationary period. I had just finished school and planned on taking a gap year, so worked out well in my mind. I started about 2 months before summer and it was nice. We had a base of coworkers that worked well with each other. Mostly middle-aged women and some pensioners. Found out quick the smoke break was for gossiping about the others, and sometimes I took part when clients pissed me off or other coworkers. Usual daily things. I was told from day one that the manager didn't give a crap about us because she was also manager at a bigger store. The rule was if you had someone to cover you, it was fine to do whatever. Some took hour-long breaks, some drank during the job, but I was trying to make a good impression on my first job in that town, so I never did anything like that. Since I didn't have that much of a social life, I always changed shifts when someone needed, came in if someone was sick, even stocked the end shelves, which were the shift manager's job. When the pensioners asked in the middle of the day to change assignments because their back hurt from stocking, I was always okay with it, and they were really thankful. One of them, let's call her Lydia, was actually a neighbor and friends with my grandparents, so we used to hang out during lunch breaks, and she even comforted me when I had a panic attack. We used to ride home together on our bikes when we finished together. She kinda took me under her wing and used to call me her work granddaughter. Things kinda took a turn once summer started. Usually, it was about 1,000 euros per 2 registers. Now, it was suddenly 2,000 per one. They also hired summer workers who were 3 16-year-old stock boys, one being the manager's son. Not to be an old-timer cursing the work ethics of children, but they were literally playing some tank games on their phone on the store floor while they had a cart of stuff that they needed to put out in front of them. Not to mention the not checking of dates, shoving old stuff in the back and new in the front, not checking if the barcode matched the price tag's barcode. What really pisses me off was that they didn't flush and peed all over the toilet seats. Management made it my job to clean up after them. I was told I couldn't say anything to call them out, so it became my everyday duty to clean the toilets, cause the cleaner only came in the morning. Then the self-service checkouts came. I was the only cashier there when the builders put them in, so it became my duty to train the others, including management and the two 60-plus somethings. Lydia took it easy. The old man literally refused to learn. So now, every day, either me or Lydia had to be in the store cause the old man refused. It was also regular he came in drunk and drank at work. Also, used to hit on me a lot, but I brushed it off. So, a lot on my shoulders. Crap went down after I got my vaccine in the start of August. I had 2 days off. Figured I wouldn't get that sick cause I already had it. It was about a week or so before my probation period ended. So on Monday, I felt terrible and called in. My first time during the whole time I worked there. Called in with the manager, "You have to come in, Lydia's on vacation and the only other one who knows is already sick, and you didn't give us proper notice." Try to argue that I have a fever of 39 and feel like crap. No, have to come in. So I get my crap together and go to work. Scrubbing the toilet floor with a fever. Dealing with customers with a fever. Yes, I took more breaks. Most coworkers asked me why I look like crap, and I told them I was sick. End of the day and go home. Next day, I feel even worse. Call in, say, "No, I'm putting my foot down, I can't come." First time I took a stand and said I can't destroy my health. Fine, you call Lydia and tell her. If she agrees, then you have to take sick leave. Okay, not really my job, but fine. Call her, woke her up, apologized profusely, and told her the situation. She understood, wished me to feel better, and hung up. I called my doctor and got on sick leave, and then informed my manager. Went back to sleep. I got a call a few hours later. It's Lydia. "You make everyone's lives so difficult here. Come in and give me your resignation." She isn't the manager, she's just a cashier like me. I asked, "WTF?" And she told me that they have been talking on the smoke break with all the shift managers and the main manager, and apparently they decided I complained too much about my health and about other workers. I asked why my manager didn't call me. No real explanation. I said if the manager wants to fire me, she'd have to call me herself. No call. So 2 hours later, I call her myself. Ask her what's going on. It's true. I need to resign my position. I ask why they don't just terminate me. I'm still on probation. Can't cause you're on sick leave. Doesn't really make sense. During the probation period, they can fire me with no notice, no reasoning. I'm fuming at this time. Fine. I'll come in with my 39-degree fever. Got on my bike, pedaled the 3 kilometers. Everyone is giving me dirty looks. Manager gives me a filled out paper stating I quit on the day for personal reasons. I ask, "So you can't fire me because I'm on sick leave? I need to resign?" Manager says yes, it's too much paperwork to fire me, she doesn't have the time. Okay, deal. I take out a blank piece of paper, write my quitting date as 2 weeks from now, to be polite and give them the proper notice. Manager was fuming and argued I can't do that. I said, that's the time frame I need to give according to my contract. She was too lazy to argue more. I signed the sheet and walked out, called my doctor the next morning and talked about my sick leave. Few days later, the manager calls me. Tomorrow is the big town fair. I'm definitely not sick anymore and can come in tomorrow. They are super short-staffed. I said that I'm on sick leave. She said I can't still be feeling crap and get into work right now. I told them no, my sick leave ends on day after my resignation date. She got super pissy and said that if I didn't come to work, she'd have to be on the register the whole day. To that, I just coughed fakely and said, well, have fun, and hung up. Spent the 2 weeks on the beach on paid sick leave, and also my probation lapsed, so they had to pay me the bonus. Okay, a couple things I noticed in this case. Number 1, OP's username, Prime Minister Dumbass. That leads me to believe that OP might be Canadian, and the way they type doesn't make me think that they're from any of the other countries that have a prime minister, so I think they're from here. Now, if you're in Ontario, it's a one-party consent province. What that means is that you can record a conversation from a phone in your pocket and you don't have to have the other person's permission. OP, if I were you, I would have recorded those conversations and I would have gone straight to the labor board because it's a constructive dismissal when they're telling you that you need to resign because they can't fire you due to your sick leave. I know you got a bonus the way you did it, but I think you could have gotten a heck of a lot more if you'd gone through the labor board. Our next story today comes to us from Cager on Two Wheels. You want to be alerted whenever anything critical happens? Yes sirree. Let's jump right in. Context. I work on implementing various kinds of enterprise monitoring software. I'm, or my company is, the guys that arrive, install, and configure the monitoring solution, train people, and then move on to another customer. This requires a lot of input and back and forth with the customer, as doing and planning everything beforehand is not possible, as customers usually don't know what they want, what they need, and what the tool can do, which are three very separate things. Part of the job is implementing what the customer needs, not what he thinks he wants. This particular customer was getting a full end-to-end solution, from network and server infrastructure to end-user synthetic monitoring. Think scripts that simulate a user to ensure the applications are working at all times and measure response times. Obviously, this kind of full-on implementation comes from high up, usually the very top of high up. This company is also the kind of company that if anything screws up, it's on breaking news. It is also part government owned, so the higher-ups are not only rich and powerful, they are also connected and political. Now on to the story itself. We are at a meeting with the higher-ups from the company, think CIO, CEO, etc. The CIO in particular is a nasty piece of work. Though he is competent, he has a bad temper, no patience, and is used to people doing whatever he says. He's the kind, I demand you call me Engineer X kind of guy. The meeting was a technical one to hammer out some monitoring details. These higher-ups wanted to be in on all meetings to get a feel on how things were going, and make quick calls to get any issues that might arise. A bit over the top, but it happens, and is fine if they only intrude when needed. Remember, this was a tech meeting. The meeting is about a particular component, the network monitoring component. It has just been installed and configured, and we were on the tuning phase, where we select what alerts are relevant, what is critical, which network nodes are critical, and which aren't. A core switch going down would mean 9 o'clock news headlines. Some Wi-Fi router would mean someone would get less network on his laptop. At one point we discuss alerts. One colleague of mine asks, "What do you want to be alerted on?" At this point, all the techs and consultants were a bit tired of the CIO constantly, aggressively, and impolitely telling everyone how things should be done. Mostly stuff he had little idea how it worked. True to form, he interrupts immediately and says, "I want to be alerted by SMS for every critical event that appears." Me and my colleagues try to explain that is not a good idea at all. My supervisor also butts in and tells him that is not what he wants. His response was, "I am the one who knows what I want. I pay the bills. You do what I want. If you do not do what I want, you will feel my breath on your back." We trade a pointed amongst us that read, "He asked for it." I tell him that will be implemented during the day on Friday. We just need the number to send the SMS to. And so it was done. This network solution in particular is notable in the industry for being the best, but out of the box, it alerts for everything. A switch has a fan that is not rotating because it's supposed to be there, but it's not actually physically there, so the readout says 0. That's a critical event. A network port that has an administrative status of up, meaning it's turned on, and should have a network cable on it, but has a link status of down, meaning there's no network cable there, that's a critical event. With switches numbering in the hundreds, and ports per switch numbering also in the hundreds, if not thousands, obviously, network devices going down and things like that are also critical events. The trick is to figure out that for some devices, that network admin status difference to actual link is a major problem, and that for others is just someone lazily turned them all on and didn't actually need to connect them all. Usual procedure is to SMS or email only on nodes going down, throughput going over a certain threshold, etc. He wanted everything. we gave him everything. Turned all the events to forward to the SMS gateway at Friday, 5:59 p.m. Left at 6 o'clock exactly. He received around 500,000 events during the weekend. He tried to call my supervisor, me and my colleague, my supervisor's boss and his boss. Our team had our phones off, on purpose obviously. His phone received SMSs non-stop every half a second for the whole weekend. Even if we were contacted, we'd need to go physically on site, but our security passes would not allow for that, and we were also not obliged to work on weekends. He couldn't have his phone off due to other duties, so it rang happily through the night. I guess at one point he put it on silent. Come Monday, a very angry and now quite polite CIO came round our post and asked us to turn that off. We did, and his phone kept receiving the backlog of critical events for quite a few days after, 24/7, until the whole backlog on the SMS gateway was cleared. That story in particular is why we now have a strong policy of never ask the customer what he wants alerted on or monitored. He will say everything. Don't we all love when the self-indulgent wieners tell people to do something and it just comes back to kick them in the butt? This is one of the best examples of that I've read so far. CIO tried to flex his muscles, but then got flexed back on by IT. How it should be. Our next story today comes to us from Who Skewed the Pooch? Reconsider working here if I want to take a honeymoon? Okay, let's jump right in. I had a manager who hated reading emails and would miss important issues and meetings because of it. I even suggested text-to-speech to make it less unpleasant, but he told me off. He spent a lot of time playing golf with clients and was mostly inaccessible. It got to the point where most of the team CC'd me. I was the next on the totem pole, so I could grant approvals for stuff like expense reports and help out on projects my manager was supposed to work on. When I was getting married, I requested 3 weeks off for my honeymoon. Everyone knew I was getting married. Manager even congratulated me on the engagement when it happened. I had 5 weeks vacation accumulated and didn't think it would be a big deal, especially since I was requesting it nearly 8 weeks in advance. Then, a vacation request denied email comes in from our time off system. I emailed manager following up, left voicemails, and after a week, he finally replied to an email. Look, we need dedicated people. If you think you can take 3 weeks off for a vacation, you need to reconsider your position here. Keep in mind, my request stated, vacation request for honeymoon. I replied with, no consideration needed, my last day will be, date in 3 weeks. Let me know about transitioning duties. I forwarded this to HR, CCing the manager, and HR sets up my exit interview. But HR tells my manager to set up transition for my responsibilities. During my notice period, I even replied all to this email twice, asking about transition plans since I didn't get any transition plan. I tell my team, they ask manager what to do with my duties, and manager says he'll think about it, but doesn't do anything nor email anything out. 4 weeks later, I get a call from my old boss. Are you planning on coming in this week? Why would I? Because you work for me? Not as of last week. Stop messing around, get your butt in the office. I told you my last day when you denied my vacation request. How about giving proper notice and transitions? HR asked you to develop a transition plan and to attend my exit interview. It's not my fault you don't read all your emails. I hang up and block his number, but screenshot the call log and sent it to the HR contact with an innocent, should I be worried old manager thinks I still work for him? Fallout. Things went from bad to worse for my old manager. Apparently, I was doing most of his managerial duties, so he actually had to try and get stuff done himself. He also got into some legal issues, those client golf outings, he played golf, but not with clients, that made his termination with cause, so no severance for him. I ended up at a competitor with a nice bump in pay. I wanted to start after my honeymoon, but new company really wanted my help on a pitch. I joined for several weeks, reworking 1/3 of the pitch, and then went on my honeymoon for 3 weeks. They paid me for the entire time off. That garnered a lot of goodwill from both me and my wife. I only left the company because Mrs. and I moved cross-country and they didn't have remote positions back then. Have none of these managers learned that you don't present an ultimatum to one of your workers unless you're prepared to deal with either outcome? In this case, this manager definitely wasn't. It was suggested in the comments down below this one that the proper way to deal with a manager like this is to say, "I'll be taking 3 weeks off. You can let me know if I have a job or not when I get back." Our next story today comes to us from Computer1313. Don't order any extra inventory. We use just-in-time inventory. Let's jump right in. At the start of the pandemic, my manager recognized the impending logistics nightmare and that the company's JIT system might suffer from that. Some of the parts used in our manufacturing will run out within several hours if the routine delivery trucks don't show up on time. If our plant is unable to run, the other plant that requires our output stuff will also be forced to shut down because guess what? They also use our JIT system. The department manager agreed with my manager after holding a meeting with the supplier representatives who all told him that they were having their own problems with getting input inventory for their production, along with truck driver shortages and employees calling in sick. The problem was that the inventory audits would fail you if you had excessive inventory, which tied my department manager's hands. Someone in another department took the initiative of ordering extra parts after they started having delivery delays. All it took was an inventory audit and they were forced to correct their inventory levels. Simultaneously, a few of my coworkers that were involved with searching for alternative suppliers couldn't make any headway because the alternative suppliers charged a higher price to make the parts, and the company would not accept that. My department manager promptly put out an email stating that until the corporate HQ changes their policy, there will be no deviation from the JIT system, no matter how many production disruptions we have. By the time the JIT system was revised to allow holding more parts, we had a few weeks of lost production time within a fiscal year, especially when one of the suppliers was hit by severe weather and was flooded. Of course, our parts from that flooded supplier ran out very quickly. One of my coworkers that was in the alternative supplier search found it hilarious because we could have avoided that issue by using an alternative supplier that charged about 10% more for the parts. And the other plant was also forced to halt operations because we couldn't deliver them our stuff. For me personally, I had a project where a vendor straight up told me that they had no idea when certain industrial control system parts would arrive to finish overhauling a station. But I also couldn't deviate from the original project plans because of how much paperwork and approvals are required to use substitute parts. It was a fun time telling my manager, "We have no idea when we can finish building this system." Now, I don't have a lot of factory experience, but it doesn't take somebody who's worked in a factory to realize that just-in-time inventory just doesn't make sense, because it counts on everything being perfect. The weather, transportation, labor relations, manufacturing supply conditions, and health conditions considering what's happening right now. I understand that if it's working perfectly, it's incredibly efficient. But what about when it doesn't work perfectly? When there's a hiccup in the supply chain, how much does that end up costing the company? Is it more than keeping some items in a warehouse so that they're ready at any time? Again, I didn't work in factories very much, so if you have, comment down below and let me know what you think. Our last story today comes to us from Razgriz S57. Want me to start my shift 10 minutes later than everyone else? Okie dokie. Let's jump right in. So this happened last year. I work for a shipping company. Boxes come out of a shipping container, get scanned into the system, and put onto a system of conveyor belts. The boxes then come down the belts to a line of workers who remove said boxes from said conveyor belts and load them into delivery trucks. I work at the end of one of these belts. This spot is special because not only do I have to load my own delivery trucks, but I also get the boxes that others missed further up the belt. I have to take these off and put them aside in a special cart for someone to put back into the system later. At the beginning of each shift, we also unload from those delivery trucks the boxes that the drivers were unable to deliver. They go on the belt, I take them off the belt and put them in the cart. Because where I am is at the end of this whole process. We have the time to do this before new boxes get fed to us, and so I have the time to take care of these missed boxes before new boxes get to me. So as you can see, my job starts at the same time as everyone else's. Then my shift was pushed back 10 minutes. You see, because I am at the very end of this whole process, upper management decided they can save some money by having me start a little bit later. After all, it takes maybe 10 minutes for the new boxes to exit the shipping containers before they would ever get to me. Because their logic is sound, and because the system logs what my start time is, and because I do not start getting paid for my time until then, I decided to wait 10 minutes later than everyone else before doing any work. I warned my belt supervisor I'm doing this, not that he can do anything about it, or had any decision in changing my start time. So now, when the shift begins, several dozen packages begin piling up at the end of the belt. These are often ridiculously heavy packages in crumbling boxes, which the drivers left behind because they didn't want to deal with them. My supervisor has to get someone else who is on the clock to deal with these packages, which annoys them. The guy who moves the special cart to deposit these boxes back into the system is annoyed because he's accustomed to it being ready about 10 minutes after the shift begins. I'm annoyed because I have to deal with this pile up of boxes before I can begin dealing with the new ones coming down the belt. My supervisor is annoyed because this distraction at the end of the belt prevents them from doing other parts of the job until it's dealt with. The managers are annoyed because I'm sitting on my butt for 10 minutes before I'm able to fix this mess. This lasted for about 2 weeks before I noticed my start time was now the same as everyone else's. My only question on this one is, why did it take 2 weeks to sort it out? Were they sitting back and going, hey, let's wait and see if it'll sort itself out? Or, let's wait 2 weeks and see if everybody forgets who caused this mess? I mean, come on. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.